Well, good morning. My name is Kevin Bueltmann, and I work for Shepherd's Canyon Retreat, which is a ministry based out of Arizona, but we serve people all over the United States and even all over the world. And I can tell you more about that later. What I want to do is tell you how to care for your pastor by way of a lot of different things. First, I'm going to tell you a little bit of my history. Then I'm going to tell you why we should care for pastors. And then we're together where we're going to talk about how we're going to care for pastors. If you want the slides, you can get them now. I'll also have this up later on as well. First, I just want to tell you a story about a burned out pastor. Okay, there was a pastor who was in charge of a big ministry and a church. He was one of two pastors at this large church. The lead pastor, the senior pastor, left right before COVID. And so the church leaders said, hey, we want you to be in charge. We want you to take the vacancy while we're looking for another pastor to be the lead pastor. For whatever reason, he said yes, even though he had a lot on his plate already, but added the senior pastor load to his responsibilities. After a year, still being vacant, he's taking care of this large church, and he's completely burned out. He's been asking his elders for help. They didn't really believe him until one Sunday when he was leading the worship service. He forgot to say the words of institution. And we can talk about the theological implications of that later on, but he came back to his office and he was in such a burned out state that he was just physically, emotionally spent. And two of his elders came into the office to kind of remind him to say the words of institution at the next service. And it was when they saw tears in his eyes that they knew that this pastor was burnt out and needed help. And I know the story really well because it's my story. And so fortunately, my wife told me about a place called Shepherd's Canyon Retreat. And so we went there, and that's what began the healing process. During my time of burnout, now that I look back at that time, I did not have much love or joy or peace or patience or kindness or goodness. I was still a faithful servant, and I don't know if I was very gentle at that time either, but I didn't have very many fruits of the Spirit. Now, the fruits of the Spirit's not like an extra 9 commandments. It's the results. It's like what is flowing out of you. And so I didn't have a lot of these back then when I was going through my burnout period. Just to give you a little bit of my history here, I started off in ministry in Illinois as a DCE, in Montana as a DCE in Kalispell, Montana. Then I went to Illinois as a DCE. Then in 95, went to be a camp director in Nebraska at the Lutheran camp there. And then eventually went to be in camp ministry at Camp Silka in Illinois. And then went to seminary and came out to be a pastor in Illinois. And then ended up going to Montana, back to the same church that I served when I first began ministry. And I was a camp director and pastor out there. And then eventually, as I told you my story here, that I went to Shepherd's Canyon Retreat, which is an LCMS RSO, which is a recognized service organization. It's northwest of Phoenix. I worked there because a year and a half ago, Dave Anderson was the founder of the ministry here, and he asked me to come and be a site manager. Well, 6 months ago, since he turned 80, he decided to turn the ministry over to me. So now I'm the director there at Shepherd's Canyon Retreat. A couple months ago, a pastor wrote to me and said, I've become a spiritual zombie, dead but moving. It's more than just a dark night of the soul. At this point, I'm not even sure God exists. Can you help? I really have nowhere to turn. Can you imagine a pastor saying, I'm not even sure God exists? You know, to be in such a burnout state that because the thing is that when I was in my burnout state, I was angry at everybody. I was even angry at God. It's like, God, why have you forsaken me, you know? But since then, I've learned too that there's a lot of issues there going on internally and externally here. He ended up coming to our retreat, and he said, this is the best retreat of my life. As a matter of fact, this is just the best week of his life, and he thanked us profusely, and he's in a really, really good shape. As a matter of fact, he went back home to his wife, and she said, a couple weeks later, she's like, who's this guy you sent back? He's not the same man that went to that retreat. And as a matter of fact, she was so thrilled that she said, I do marketing for hundreds of churches. I want to do marketing for you for free. And so these brochures is the first thing that I asked her to make for us. And so, and she does that all for free now because she's so grateful for what happened. Well, anyway, a guy from England said, who tows the tow trucks? In other words, pastors are like the tow trucks that help tow the other cars. But when the tow truck gets in trouble, who tows the tow truck? So what challenges do pastors and other church workers have? You know, they have burnout, stress, overwork, compassion fatigue, church or staff conflict, depression, anxiety, unmet goals, unmet expectations, current or future changes, unable to take a day off, marriage and family challenges, lack of energy, direction. Some come to us because they're preparing for a sabbatical or dealing with grief. So who burns out? People, helpers who are overly dedicated, sympathetic, overcommitted, perfectionistic, and empathetic. So lots of people can get burned out. Everyone in this room has probably been burned out at one point in life or not here. But and so the people that fits, it could be pastors, missionaries, chaplains, DCEs, school teachers and principals, and even spouses. Because here's the thing: is when a pastor has challenges, he's not always going to preach about all his problems in front of the church. Not always the best or easiest way to deal with problems. Sometimes you can't go talk to his fellow pastors because sometimes you kind of want to maintain a certain level of, equality with your pastors. You don't want to give them the impression that you're a bad pastor or whatever. You might end up, it's just embarrassing. And so sometimes pastors will talk to their wives, the ones that are married. And but then when they're dumping all this pain and sorrow on their wife, that's not always a good thing because that messes up the marriages and stuff. So anyway, so there's some external reasons for burnout or for whatever. And there's some internal and some other things here. External is the ones that we're going to talk about today. This is the ones that you guys as church members. By the way, how many of you guys, do we have some pastors here? I'm just curious. Okay, good. Then we can talk about them. All right, no, just kidding. No, but I'm so glad that the rest of you are here to support your pastor. And that's really great. What's that?
Does the father of the pastor count?
That's great. You're here to help support your son. So external sources of burnout, and this is things that we as lay people can control. If the pastor ends up getting too many responsibilities, or he doesn't have enough appreciation or support, inadequate resources or staff, unresolved conflict, ever-changing, this isn't something you can control, but these are things that are outside of his control. Changing government guidelines, living in a post-Christian era. This government guidelines, I know of pastors who tell me all the time, they're like, here's the thing is that when COVID happened, and then there was all these changing government guidelines, it didn't matter if I was on this side or this side, I was going to make people mad at me. And so they had a no-win situation. Here, I'm supposed to be leading these people in a positive, neutral way, but these people are saying, no, this is the best way. People are saying, this is the best way. And so I know pastors that have taken a call to serve elsewhere because they thought, you know what? Now that COVID is over, I'm sort of like still this negative, I represent the other side of the argument. And so he just felt like he needed to take a call to kind of remove himself as the, whatever, so that someone else could come in that's more neutral and stuff. So, there's a lot of struggles there with all this stuff here. The thing is that there's also internal sources of burnout. And that's what we deal with at our retreat centers. We deal with a lot of the internal things because we can't control what happens at your churches out there, but we can control how the pastor deals with those challenges that they're facing. So the internal sources of burnout would be like perfectionism. I've got to get this perfect. Like that day that I missed saying the words of institution. I was in such an emotional state that because I felt like I had exposed myself as a failure in front of the entire congregation. Inability to set boundaries. I should have said no when they asked me to take on the vacancy of the church that I was serving. Low self-esteem, difficulty delegating, and then unaddressed emotional issues here. Because see, here's the thing is that sometimes people are don't really understand what it means to go to counseling, okay? If you've never done it before, it's like, oh, it's just for the crazy people or something like that. There's all these misconceptions about counseling and therapists. And, but the thing is that, people will go to the doctor when they have a physical challenge. A therapist is someone that you can go to when you have an emotional challenge. And it's sort of like looking in a mirror. The therapist or the counselor helps you look in the mirror and see what is going on. There's also spiritual. This is a spiritual warfare. This is spiritual warfare going. Satan does not want our pastors to succeed, because if he can mess up a pastor, he can kind of mess up the whole church sometimes. And we've seen that in different ways here, because we have an adversary who roams around seeking whom he may devour. 1 Peter 5:8. One of the lies that the devil tries to convince us, that God isn't strong enough to accomplish his will without our help. How arrogant is that of me to think that God needs me so much that I can't take a day off, or that that he can't function without my help. And that's part of the challenge, is because we have so many people in our churches that we're supporting, we're helping, and they need our help. And there's emergencies, things like that. We need to go be the shepherd of the flock. But a lot of times, one of the internal spiritual lies that we believe is that we are superheroes. But God is the superhero. He's the one that we need help from. He doesn't need our help as much as we need his help. And so that's part of that too here. So how is being a pastor different than other jobs? Because some people are like my elders at my church were like, yeah, well, we all get burned out at our jobs. How's this any different for you? Go ahead.
Responsible for leading souls.
Responsible for leading souls. That's a heavy weight, isn't it?
I would imagine.
It is.
People look to you for God's word, God's gifts to us, and if you fail in some public way, that can change how they view God.
Yeah.
Our congregation, the number of people that are shut-ins, that are in assisted living, nursing homes, and so forth, this has tripled what it was 5 years ago. More and more elderly. Now, who's going to visit all those people? Who's going to give them communion whenever they can?
Right.
And the pastor has to do all of that, plus do sermons and everything else. We've been in a vacancy period in our our congregation for 15 months now, because our pastor went through burnout.
I think it's some similar situation where I am an elder. I think a lot of it is lack of training, because I don't think...
Lack of training for you or for the pastor?
Yeah, for the elders.
For the elders, yeah.
Because, I came into this, you got to go to church, and you do this, and you do that, and you do that. But nobody said nothing about, and sometimes you're going to have to go out and visit, or...
Pastors and a lot of church workers, they live in fishbowls.
Yes.
Because everybody in the congregation sees everything.
Yep.
And every little thing is basically open. So it's much harder, whereas people in our jobs, we don't live in that. And so we're not exposed to that sight and that everybody being able to see.
Yeah. Well, and then part of that too is that, like, let's say you have 100 people in your church, actively in your church. It's like you have 100 different bosses telling you what to do. Well, the organ's too loud, too soft. Your preaching's too long, too short. It's like, how do you please them all and all that? And so even though there are elders, and by the way, how many of you are elders at your church? That's awesome. So glad you're here. So glad you're here. We've actually talked about how we could provide some sort of a elders training or something like that. I guess we could just fly you guys all down to Arizona and we'll have a retreat. But so we'll see. We're still praying about that. Yeah, go ahead.
I don't know how a pastor ever turns it off.
Oh, yes.
It's not like you go to the office, you do, like most of us, you do your thing. Even, like myself, I'm on call.
Yeah.
But when I'm away, I'm still away.
Yeah.
And I don't know how a pastor, with your vocation, I don't know how you ever turn it off.
It's very difficult. It's very difficult.
I'm out for such and such a time.
Yeah. No, and that's why when I actually resigned I actually resigned my call before I came to Shepherd's Canyon, because I'm just like, I'll just go be Walmart greeter. At least then I know how to greet people at the door. And once I'm done, I leave there. I'm done working. All right. Well, I'm going to keep moving here because there's this thing called compassion fatigue. Compassion fatigue is the physical, psychological, and emotional impact of helping people who have experienced trauma, especially when you absorb too much trauma in a short amount of time. Okay, so this is different than burnout. Okay, burnout, you're busy, busy, busy. Maybe it's for a season and then you're not busy. And so they're like, okay, good, over with that. Compassion fatigue is a little bit more serious because that's where pastors, and because it could be like, well, here, you may not be directly exposed to something traumatic, but as you hear someone's traumatic story, you may feel empathy for them and experience some sort of their trauma in a secondhand way. And so pastors are always hearing stories that they have pledged not to tell anyone else. You can tell your pastor anything, and so they have to. I mean, they can't even tell their wives. There's stories of members, and not that you shouldn't go talk to your pastor, but they absorb some of this stuff here. And especially like when COVID came, they're getting all kinds of trauma. There's people dying. There's people in the hospital and they can't go visit them. And there's all this trauma going on here. And so the Latin roots of compassion means to suffer with someone. 1 Corinthians says, talks about the body of Christ and that its parts should have equal concern for each other. If one part suffers, every part suffers with it. If one part is honored, every part rejoices with it. We are called as the body of Christ to have compassion for others, and some people end up getting full-time jobs where they can have compassion for others, such as those in the medical field, counselors, pastors, and others. So it's not just pastors that deal with compassion fatigue, but there's people that even if you're caring for your mom or a loved one that's in the hospital or whatever. Yes, go ahead.
One of the things that can help your congregation with this issue
Yeah.
is having a good Stephen ministry program.
Absolutely. Oh, definitely. Yeah.
And of that, and of course, that does place some degree of additional requirements on the pastor. But you can have a Stephen leader who can lead the program as a layperson.
Yes.
But they have to go through the online training to get to that point. But, if you have some Stephen ministers,
Yeah.
they can take care of some of these people that don't require constant attention by the pastor.
Absolutely. So I don't know if you guys are familiar with that, but it's an excellent program. Check it out. Talk to this guy afterwards here, Thomas. But that also relates to even with shut-in calls. Someone was talking about shut-in calls. Yeah, that was you. Okay. So, because like at my last church, we would even have, eventually we got to a point where the Stephen ministers would do some of the shut-in calls. They wouldn't necessarily do the communion part, depending on your church's, beliefs about that. But the pastor would still do his part in providing communion. But the Stephen ministers would come in and provide that care because, some of those shut-ins, if it's like a whole month for a short conversation. It's a long time to go without seeing people from the church.
That's right.
So yeah, thank you for bringing that up here. Okay, I'm going to put this up in case you weren't here at the beginning, because I'm about ready to go through some other things here. This is more the nuts and bolts of what we're doing here. If you wanted to watch the slides or look at them here, don't peek ahead though. Okay, don't peek ahead. But this is what we're going to go to next. But if you want these slides, and I'll have it at the end too, if you want that here. So there's this thing called the spiritual wellness wheel. Okay. And so there's a lot of different things about this here. First of all, everything we do in life is surrounded by our spiritual wellness. That's the important thing here. In the center is in baptism. We are a new creation in Christ. Okay, but there's other things involved too, because we are humans, and so we have a physical well-being we need to worry about, financial, vocational, intellectual, relational, emotional, all these different things here. So I'm going to give you my answers here in a minute, but I want to hear just briefly here, what are some, let's start with spiritual here. How can we help our pastors in their spiritual walk with God? How can we help them spiritually? Yes, yeah, go ahead.
In our church, we have 3 pastors, and we kind of try to get them on a rotation where
Yeah,
they can sit in a pew with their family.
that's awesome. That's awesome. I highly recommend that if you've got that ability to do that. Yeah, or even just bring in a pastor to come preach. Bring me in. I'll come preach for you guys for a Sunday and give your pastor a chance to sit in the pews. That'd be fine. So yeah, a couple of things I put down on here, and these are not, this is not like the right answers or the most comprehensive thing. There's lots of reasons here, lots of things here. Ask your pastor how you can specifically pray for his family. Pray for your pastor and with him. So, you know, sometimes we say, oh, I'll pray for you, and you walk away. Well, let's pray right now. You know, why not? Specifically share how God has used him to encourage your walk with Jesus. And another thing, too, is initiate a 3-month sabbatical for every 5 to 7 years of ministry at your church. A lot of Lutheran churches are not really good at providing sabbaticals for their pastors. It's a very, very important thing. The Bible, the Old Testament, talks a lot about the Sabbath day of rest, but there's also things that are helpful for a pastor to take some time off every 5 to 7 years. Now, some people hear the word sabbatical and they think of like a professor that takes 3 months off to write a book or a theological, you know, dissertation or something like that here. That's not really what we're talking about here, although it could be. If that's what energizes your pastor, oh, I'd love to have 3 minutes to work on this book I've been writing or something like that. Great, great, great. Okay, but for a lot of pastors, they just need time to reflect and refocus, you know, and whether it's by themselves, with their family, whatever here. I mean, and it's not like a 3-month vacation. That's not what we're talking about here. This is a sabbatical where, you know, you have to bring in somebody to take over for 3 months if they don't have 3 pastors, whatever here. But anyway, it's something that's really important. Investigate that. Do some Google searches on pastor sabbaticals, because I don't have time to talk about it here. But go ahead.
Oh, I'm
Yeah.
just going to ask you very quickly
Yeah.
on that point. We have 2 called workers at our congregation, including our pastor.
Yeah.
And in the call documents for both of them, we wrote that they're able to take a sabbatical every 5 years.
Great. That's
And,
awesome.
So our elders are starting to look at that. Is there anything, maybe just a couple of bullet points that you can recommend for what that 3 months looks like? Or
Yeah.
if our pastor's not writing a book, I mean, what is that?
Right. Well, so one place that I would encourage you to look at is, what is it called? Well, it's in Indiana, because the pastors in Indiana get a special grant. It's for $50,000, up to $50,000, and it will cover like cost of travel, things like that here. Several years ago, when I needed a break, I needed a sabbatical, I applied for this grant. I didn't get it, but some of the things that I put in there, like time for traveling, like my college roommate has been overseas in Kyrgyzstan for the last 30 years. I've never had time or money to go over and see him. But the sabbatical would give me time to fly, whatever it is, 30 hours over there and have the money to pay for that flight and just things like that. You know, my sister is a missionary in Germany to the immigrants from that speak Farsi and stuff like that here. And so, you know, I've never been there to see her ministry. You know, I just haven't taken the time or the money to do that. So some of it is just doing things that that you wouldn't normally be able to do just on a 1-week vacation kind of a thing here or whatever. Some of it is, you know, spending time in reading. It could be going to workshops or going to things that for their benefit to refresh them. It could be like a marriage event, maybe a husband and wife go to. I had a guy contact me last week that wants to come down to Shepherd's Canyon retreat for a week, and because he's doing a summer sabbatical this coming summer. And I said, well, that's great. We'd love to have you come out and do that. I would recommend you do that early in the sabbatical so that you could process things that as you do. Actually, I actually encourage people to come to us before they plan it so they could do what you're talking about is knowing what to do during a sabbatical. But there's some resources. I wasn't really fully prepared to talk about that, so I'm just shooting from the hip. But thank you. That's a great question. Yeah.
I'm also kind of interested in that. Are there any things that you could recommend online? I know you're shooting from the hip, but
Yeah.
if we connect later, would we be able to maybe?
So one thing I would do, and let's see if that's too far in my thing here. Let me just show you a place here to, okay. So there's this thing called Grace Place Wellness Ministries, okay? And so they have taken over this website that used to be about sabbaticals. So they have kind of taken that on as part of their ministry here. So just look up Grace Place Wellness and say, hey, tell us what you know about sabbaticals, or just go to their website. There's probably a link with a whole bunch of stuff. And that's what I would strongly recommend is to go to that website and take a look at that. So, yeah. All right. Well, I'm running shorter on time because this is supposed to be done in 5 minutes. So, pay for a health club membership, okay? You know, because I tell you what, you know, the average person across America, the obesity rate is 40%. Do you know what it is with LCMS pastors? And I am one, so you can kind of use me as an example here. But it's 70% of our LCMS pastors are obese. That's like almost double the national average. So help them, showing appreciation through words, gifts, helping him, time, hugs, etc. Give him a day off, okay? And a day off is different than a sabbatical day, you know, because, you know, pastors should have, we should all have a day of Sabbath where we don't work, you know, all that stuff here, and then a different day for a day to do yard work and stuff like that here. Because some people think like, well, a day off is just a day to get the stuff, is the day to work at home. Well, that's not really how it's supposed to work. But anyway, I'll let you wrestle with that in the word here. Allow him to take 3 months sabbatical every few years for reflection, renewal, and revitalization. Your church will benefit as much as he does. That's the thing, is that some churches think like, oh, we can't let him be, you know, take off for 3 months. What are we going to do? You know, and it's like, hey, there's 100 of you. I think you guys can figure it out, you know. But the thing is that when he comes back, he's going to have so much more energy and joy and rejuvenation. It's going to be so much important here. Financial well-being. Care for him financially with a generous salary, insurance, and retirement plan. It is true that a pastor should not shepherd the flock of God just for money, but he shouldn't live in poverty either. Your pastor can better serve the church if he's not constantly worrying about financial matters. And so here's a little thing I wanted to show you guys here, because this is kind of my challenge where I was at, is that, you know, okay, so I don't get district scale on the salary, but at least I have a good health retirement. Oh, wait a minute. No, they cut that back to the lowest possible, you know, health plan. I have to pay like $4,000 if I get sick, you know. Well, at least I don't have a good salary, but at least I have lots of time to go to get away. Well, no, because or at least I have, you know. So there's all these different things, and this is like base of support. When you're rock climbing, you can't just, you've got to hang on to stuff. You can move one hand at a time, maybe 2 at a time, but if you lose 3 points of contact with that wall, you're not going to be able to stay on there very long. You're going to burn out, crash and burn. Yeah. This is a very complex issue that, you know, talk to your district staff about how to deal with salaries and stuff like that here. And those guidelines aren't just there, just pie in the sky like, well, we wish, but it's really, I mean, you could almost look at district guidelines as minimums as opposed to maximums. So anyway, but yeah, no, that's a great point. Great point, yeah. So all these things are ways to support them, because, you know, and the thing is too, is like maybe the pastor is fine with whatever you guys give him, but you know what? He has to come home and support his family. And believe it or not, his wife is supposed to be a higher priority than the church, okay? God is number one, then your wife, then your kids, and then your vocation of serving the church. Okay, these are all vocations that God has called us to, but God has called him to serve his wife first. And so supporting him in this way helps him serve his wife, and that helps him serve you better as people of God. So yeah, awesome. All right, vocational, follow his leadership. There's a verse about that. You can read that. Thank your pastor for his sermon. Tell him how God will use it in your life. It'll rejuvenate him, and to hear about your growth in the Lord. Lighten your pastor's workload by asking, how can I help? How can I get involved? And just help him out. Intellectual well-being, help build your pastor's library. This will help him become a better pastor, theologian, Bible interpreter, counselor, husband and father. Give your pastor time and finances to attend conferences, not just the required ones, but okay, I read that one. And relational. This is one where I've got the most bullet points here, because they're not even bullet points because I had so many here. Do things to help your pastor with his relationship to his wife, family, and church members. Give a gift card to a restaurant, a gift card to the kids. Provide. You know, the nice thing about gift cards is that you have to spend it. You can't just throw it in the bank and spend it on, you know, groceries. You've got to put it on, do something special with it. So that's always nice. Provide childcare for a date night. Loan out your favorite vacation spot, whether it's a cabin or camper or timeshare. Take your pastor to a concert, sporting event, hunting, etc. Take your pastor out for a meal and talk about his life, not ministry. Okay, that's really huge. Sometimes all we ever do is talk to our pastors about is ministry, and sure they enjoy it, but sometimes it's nice for a pastor to have someone take interest in them personally, their own life. Offer to mow his lawn when he's on vacation. Clear his driveway on a snowy day. Offer meat and produce from farmers. Be a friend to your pastor. Include your pastor and wife in friend groups. Financially support your pastor and wife as they attend marriage. This is an interesting, I asked for some, I went on Facebook and asked a group of pastors for some ideas of what to say in this workshop. And this is one thing here. It said, just a kind word would do wonders. There was a pastor that felt no one cared about his serving, so he accepted a call elsewhere. When I met with him, the congregation asked what they wanted for a pastor, and they said, we want one just like the one that they had. And I told them about his feelings. About 6 months later, they had a new pastor, and I visited there, and they said that they have a good pastor now, and they are telling him. The previous pastor was there for 3 years. The newest pastor has been there for 15. So encouraging words is really important. Some things here about rest. Jesus says, hey, get to yourself to a deserted place to rest for a while. There's a ministry here based out of Indiana called Run Hard, Rest Well. Encourage your pastor to be involved with that. That talks about Sabbath keeping and support and everything like that here. It teaches you how to rest. Because, it takes a lot of faith to take a Sabbath day of rest. Okay? It's because, I've got so much to do, I can't take a day off. But when we take it, when we don't take that day off, it's like we're telling God, hey God, I don't trust you enough to handle the world. I need to be in charge here for one more day. But God took a Sabbath rest. He invites us all to do that. All of us, not just our pastors, but all of us take a Sabbath rest. Anyway, I'm gonna just jump ahead here really quick. Here's just some things here. Noloma camps. You're at a Noloma camp, National Lutheran Outdoor Ministry Association camp. We have Lutheran camps all over the country here. Have your pastors go there, and sometimes they'll just let their pastor stay for free. Okay. There's also LCMS places to go for them to just spend a week. Mike was just spent, a couple months?
3 weeks.
3 weeks helping with Eden Above the Sea. That's in Hawaii. They are booked for a whole year now with pastors, LCMS pastors, and their wives could go for 1 week, and they get a car and a place to stay, no charge. I mean, that's amazing. So, marriage cruises. My wife there's that singles one that's up there. So if your pastor's single, send him to that one here. But there's a marriage cruise. My wife had been on this. It's amazing. We're going to go again next year in February. So we're real excited here. So there's some LCMS wellness ministries, and I want to help you know the difference here real quick here. I mentioned Grace Place Ministries, and they do a lot of educational stuff. It's a lot of preventative things. Like, let's just say that your pastor's doing okay. Then this is what he needs here. On the far opposite side is where my ministry's at. We are on the therapeutic side. Okay, we have 8 people come at a time. It's very customized. We have 2 therapists, a male and a female, and a chaplain. And so the 11 people are here. We have a retreat going on right now there in Arizona, and they leave on Monday. And so this is the therapeutic side. And so it's very customized, listening and helping each other work through stuff here. Doxology is kind of in the middle somewhere. They do preventative, but they also do some therapeutic type of stuff. So this is kind of the continuum. Yeah. Send us your workers if they are burnt out, need help. Invite me to speak at your church or district or event or whatever here, pastor's conference, whatever here. Pray for us. Like I say, we have a retreat going on right now. So anyway, or you can come out and volunteer. Here's a picture of Mike and Verna coming out to volunteer for us. So we love volunteers and all that. So anyway, thanks a lot.